We are going to start off with a hearing on Senate Bill 304, which is authorizing the State Board of Education to establish a new unified school district if necessary for the attachment of territory for a school district disorganized via voter petition. So we will start off with an overview from our reviser, Tamara Lawrence. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. As the chair said, Senate Bill 304 does two things. First, it would authorize the State Board of Education to establish a new school district for the purpose of attachment of territory of a disorganized school district. And the second thing is the bill would provide for administrative and judicial review of resolutions to permanently close school buildings. So on the first item, current law provides for the dissolution of a school district, and Section 1 of Senate Bill 304 would authorize the State Board of Education to attach the territory of a school district being disorganized to one or more adjacent school districts, including a new school district established by the State Board that the disorganized territory may be attached to. So the first thing is on the disorganization of school districts, and now I'm going to touch on the second thing, which is the closing of school buildings. Current law provides that a local board of education may close a school building by adoption of a resolution to that effect at any time the board determines that the building should be closed. Section 2 of Senate Bill 304 would provide that not later than 90 days after the adoption of such resolution, any resident of the school district may request administrative review of the resolution by the state board. Within 60 days after that request, the state board would issue an advisory determination that states whether the resolution is reasonable under the totality of the circumstances, and it may also include recommendations on modification or rescission of the resolution. After receiving the advisory determination, the local board would hold a public hearing to reconsider the resolution and may approve, modify and approve, or rescind the resolution at the conclusion of that public hearing. If the school board approves the resolution at that hearing, then a resident of the school district may bring an action in district court to determine the reasonableness of the resolution within 30 days. No resolution adopted by a school board to close a school building would be effective until the appropriate time frame has passed for the request for either the administrative review to be filed or the judicial review. Finally, the bill does include various technical amendments and would take effect upon publication in the statute book. And I would like to note that there is a small error on page 4 in line 43. There it references a 30-day time period provided under subsection E. But if you look in subsection E, the time period there is 90 days. So if the committee chooses to work the bill, I would request that you correct that discrepancy.
Okay. Thank you. Committee, what questions do we have for the reviser on what is a little bit more complex than the last bill that we were working on? Senator Petty.
Just a little. Tamara, in this bill, it uses the word disorganization. Is that a new term that, as far when it comes to the reference originally about if a school district is, or if school districts are being reorganized or combined together, is this deorganization, is that a new term?
It is not. The term disorganization is actually the name of an article in the statute books, and Article 6 of Chapter 72, which does relate to disorganization of school districts, has been in existence since the 1960s.
Okay, thank you. And I had a second question. Okay. And then on page 4, and that would be section 2, so you mentioned about, so is this referring to both district and district buildings?
So the first issue with disorganization, and that's in section 1, is specific to entire school districts. Section 2, however, is specific to school buildings within a school district.
And as Madam Chair, So this whole section 2 is only pertaining to buildings within a school district. So if there were 4 buildings, this is if one, and then am I understanding this? If one person that lives, let me make sure, that lives in that school district, if one person is dissatisfied, now the elected board has already made a decision, has already voted, but if one person is dissatisfied, then this process begins. I'm trying to understand, could this process, this could be continual. I mean, if one person is dissatisfied and it goes through the process, then another person could then following up that first person. So is there, I mean, I guess there is an end if there's never a second person, but that, it could be continual.
It does require that a person request review by the state board within 90 days.
Within 90 days of the original?
The original resolution adopted by the school district to close a school building.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Dietrich.
Tamara, thank you. Is that a non-binding review?
Correct. So they would issue this, the state board would review the resolution and determine the reasonableness, and then they would issue an advisory determination back to the school district.
Committee, any other questions? Senator Sykes.
And then after that advisory, then the local school district has to have an additional vote or bring it to the board.
They have to reconsider the resolution at a public hearing.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Tamara. Very briefly, and I know you said under current law is this, is there anything in current law that prevents the State Board of Education or KSDE from doing this currently?
With respect to school districts,
I'm more so in the review process, establishing a review process. Is there anything in current statute that would prevent them from doing that already?
not that I am aware of, other than I'm not quite sure what their stance would be in relation to Article 6, Section 5 of the Constitution.
You have a follow-up?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Senator Petty.
Thank you. And Tamara, you answered this for me earlier, I believe. You said that not later than 90 days after the adoption of a resolution pursuant to this section. And then it goes on down to letter G, not later than 30 days after the resolution in subsection F. So that same or different resident in letter G does not start the process over?
So I'm going to go step by step through the process, if that's all right. Okay, so the first step would be the school district would adopt a resolution to close a school building. After that initial resolution, that's when subsection E comes into play, and any resident would have 90 days to request review, administrative review by the state board. And the state board would issue its advisory opinion or advisory determination. And after the school district receives that advisory determination back from the state board, that's when they would have to conduct a public hearing. And at that public hearing, on the same resolution, they could approve the resolution again, modify and approve the resolution, or rescind the resolution. And after the school district takes that step, that's when G kicks in. And then that's when there would be 30 days for any resident of the school district who's dissatisfied with that resolution that was reapproved at that subsequent public hearing to bring in action in district court.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not seeing any further questions. So committee, I do have 2, 4, 5. I have 5 proponents that are wanting to speak, and I have 1 neutral individual that would like to speak, so that we have enough time for questions. I'm going to ask that we limit presentations to 4 minutes each. So our assistant Cindy will be the timekeeper. When you hear the chime, that means 4 minutes are up. But I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions to be asked of those proponents, as well as neutral to respond to that. So we're going to start off with Katie Wisman with Wisman's Consulting on behalf of Wetmore Community Action Association. Welcome to committee, Katie.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As she mentioned, my name is Katie Wisman, and I represent Wetmore Community Action Association. We are a strong proponent of Senate Bill 304, and some of the conferees that will follow will get into some of the mechanics and address some of the questions that you all had after the reviser's brief. What I want to do for you today is explain some of what Senate Bill 304 does do and what 304 does not do. This, we believe, is not a very complex issue. When we boil it down, we feel like it's a pretty straightforward solution to plug a hole in the existing statute. So just this year, Wetmore, who I represent, has been just one of 3 rural communities that are facing closure of their school at the end of this school year. And since introducing this bill, we've become aware of at least 3 others that have those conversations ongoing in their communities. These decisions seem to have been made pretty swiftly, and it leaves parents and teachers and students kind of in a lurch with what happens at the end of this year when their schools close. In some of these instances, we believe some of these local board actions have been a bit retaliatory and have not taken into consideration the totality of the circumstances. And all we're asking for is that when those decisions are made, that they meet a standard of reasonableness. That's not a very high standard to meet, but we want to ensure that when consolidation happens and when buildings are closed, which we understand is necessary and appropriate in some scenarios, all we're asking for is transparency in that process and for a standard of reasonableness to be met. Right now, there's not a lot of due process, and we recognize and respect the importance of our local boards and local control. Nothing in Senate Bill 304 proposes to take that away. It simply ensures that a citizen in a district whose building is being closed has access to due process, and that they have the ability to seek an administrative review that's non-binding before their school is closed. We believe this is non-controversial, nonpartisan, and we believe that it creates a due process aspect that does not exist. Ultimately, we don't want to hit the red button and go to the disorganization that's been an option for 50 years. This creates middle ground and creates a solution that does not otherwise exist. So we appreciate the opportunity to be heard and would ask for your support, and I'll let the other conferees get into more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Josh Ney with Kriegshauser Ney Law Group. Welcome to committee, Josh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee. Ms. Wisman asked me to appear today as the attorney for the Wetmore Community Action Association, and as well as an attorney for citizens that you'll be hearing from 200 miles away in Wilson, Kansas today. Just to explain some of the mechanics of the bill, since our firm was involved in drafting some of this language and how it works, I'm happy to stand for questions, especially to address some of the questions that have already been proposed and what the intent is, and if there are perhaps better ways to make it crystal clear what exactly we're trying to do here. But the genesis of this comes from our firm being contacted in the fall of 2022 by 2 different communities, first in Wilson, Kansas, and then in Wetmore, for the Central Plains District 112, as well as Prairie Hills 113. They happen to be right next to each other in the numbering sequence, but are 200 miles away. Wherein those citizens were dissatisfied with the fact that their school board was threatening and getting ready to close the school building in their towns, respectively. And so, upon being asked what are our options here as far as what are our rights as citizens to, if we don't think this is in the best interest of children, what do we do? And so obviously we were very participated in the process, the hearing process to say, please don't close our school. Here's the math. You'll hear some of that today as far as why this doesn't work. This is not in the best interest of kids and actually does not make financial sense. But the school boards, in both instances, moved forward anyway on 5-2 votes that were down community lines. The school building that wasn't being closed, the school board members that were from that area voted to close the school that was in the community of the 2 members that were voting against it. So it's along community lines. And there's a lot of dissatisfaction with that. Right now, there's only, since 1971, there's only been one option after the school votes to close a school building. There's no appeal process right now. And that's the option I advised my clients on, which is the only thing that citizens can do is this petition to disorganize, a grassroots option in 72-635. They cannot petition to have the matter of whether to transfer territory out of the district. There's no grassroots kind of petition that citizens can do to do that. The only thing they can do is press the red button and say, let's disorganize the school district, and then follow how 635 tells us to this state board to get involved to see where the territory is going to go. And so 2 things. The first is we want to disincentivize that nuclear option. The citizens need more options to increase deliberation in this process, to prevent uncertain circumstances from happening. And so that's really where the school board building appeal process comes in. We're not asking for you to approve the state board vetoing a school board closure. We're not trying to transfer local control to the state level. What we're simply asking, and where this came from, was the parallel in zoning statutes. When a citizen is dissatisfied with a decision of a county commission or a city council on a zoning dispute, they can appeal to the district court and ask the district court to review it on a reasonableness standard. So we just took it from Chapter 12 and put it in Chapter 72 just to say, at least we can all agree that this should be reasonable. It shouldn't be vindictive. There shouldn't be a smoking gun that we're closing you because you voted against our bond issue. It should be reasonable. It should make sense. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, if disorganization is going to happen anyway, and I'll stop with this comment. If disorganization is going to happen anyway, we need to clean up the statute that was last updated when my mother graduated from Beloit High School in 1971. So it's time to actually look at the statute and say, is this a clean process? Is it a reasonable process? And I'm happy to answer questions on specifically what that looks like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we know when your mom graduated. I'm sure she's very proud. Okay, at this time I call on Mike Kratke. He is from the Wilson High School Future Committee. Welcome to committee, Mike.
Thank you. My name is Michael Kratke, and I represent the Wilson High School Future Committee, and we strongly support House Senate Bill 304. Wilson High School is one of the 5 schools being closed in May of 2023. There are 582 square miles in Wilson's district. The district represents 6 communities and has 3 school systems. The local board has 7 members. Wilson School has 2 representatives. The proposal to close Wilson School was raised in November of 2022. The hearing was on January 4th, and the vote to close occurred on January 9th, 2023. Today's testimony will share more about how that process worked and why we strongly believe that the legislation proposed in SB 304 is necessary to support local boards and the local communities they serve. In the last 10 years, our district has been and is still in the black. As school closure discussions emerged, our community engaged a CPA accountant to review the financials to give the school board members a more clear understanding of whether the Wilson School was spending more revenue than it was bringing in. When completing a more detailed breakout of revenue and expenses by building, the accountant's report clearly shows that Wilson School is also in the black. The CPA identified over $600,000 of bills applied by the district which were not Wilson's expenses. With the analysis coming from an outside source, the local board did not give this report credence, and they chose to proceed with incomplete and misleading information. In this scenario, the opportunity to request an administrative review would have been gravely important to address inconsistencies between financial reports and provide clarity regarding how the local board should be evaluating the financial situation at hand. In addition to the financial reporting issues we experienced, our community was also disenfranchised and overpowered by an imbalanced board of directors. The governance structures in consolidated districts leads to an every school for themselves approach that is hurting rural communities across the state. Wilson has 2 representatives on the 7-member board, but the local board commissioned a report to evaluate cost-saving opportunities across the district. The configuration study showed that closing Wilson would save $300,000 per year, while closing the Southern High School building would save $800,000 per year. Although the study showed $500,000 per year savings difference between the 2 schools, the board began to close the Wilson facility without any real discussion about why. Wilson is relatively a new ADA-compliant facility, and the Southern School, which would have saved over $500,000 more per year, it operates in a 60-year-old building that is not ADA compliant. There was no discussion about closing the Southern School in the district, and there's nothing reasonable about how our board has proceeded in this process. Obviously, with the lack of checks and balances, it is difficult for these boards to make impartial decisions because it's an us or them type of decision. That is why our community strongly supports the need for additional checks and balances. Our district serves 6 rural communities per 3 schools, so our board is far from neutral. Our community can only vote for 2 out of the 6 board representatives. We will never be able to eliminate the us versus them problem that is embedded in the current board structure by elections alone. The measures included in Senate Bill 304 provide a simple, non-controversial approach to making sure that communities can hold their local boards to a standard of reasonableness that all Kansas need and deserve. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next up, we have Annalisa No, Wetmore Community Action Association. Annalisa, welcome to committee.
Thank you guys for having me. This is really cool to be here. It's my first time speaking at one of these. It's pretty cool. My name is Annalisa, and I represent the Wetmore Community Action Association, and our association's mission is to advocate for policies that support strong academic outcomes and economic development in rural communities in Kansas, and we are strongly, strongly supportive of SB 304. A decision about whether to close a school is one of the most important, difficult, and impactful decisions that a local school board has the authority and the responsibility to make. It involves complex financial analysis, balancing between multiple competing priorities, and the impacts of a decision like this extend far beyond the students in the classroom or the numbers on a page. Now, we are aware of at least 5 school districts who are struggling with this type of situation right now today. And with increasing financial pressure happening across the nation and enrollment declines continuing across our state, we know, everyone in this room knows, that more and more local school boards are going to be forced to face this type of decision over the next 3, 5, and even 10 years from now. So the specific communities that I'm representing today have experienced three school closures in the past 10 years. Now, one of those school closures went as well as it possibly could have. The communities are integrated, the students are thriving, and everyone is doing well and has adjusted. Now, in the other 2 scenarios that went poorly, there are still issues in those communities today, and there's social rift between both of those students and families and communities that were a part of those decisions. So if there's one thing that our communities could share about what we've learned from those experiences, it's this. This type of decision will never be easy. This type of decision will always be emotional. It will always be complicated. But the thing that we know from the one version of this that went well, it's that it will be much easier for a community to accept if, number 1, the board has a clearly justifiable rationale for the closure decision that they can present to the community clearly. And number 2, they provide a considerate and respectful approach to managing the transition and the change. Now, in the case of the last 3 of the 5 school closure discussions happening right now, the local boards are not providing either of these things for our people, and it is quite literally tearing our communities apart. Businesses have lost customers, patrons are arguing with one another over social media, and the reputations of the local board members who you're going to hear from today, their reputations have been deeply stressed by this process. Okay, the current statute related to school closure decision 72-1431, it's a very simple statute, and it really only requires two things from the local boards. Number one, the legally required standard for closure is that the decision should, quote, improve the school system of the unified school district, end quote. The next section, prior to closure, the board must hold a public hearing regarding the closure. These are the only two standards in the statute today. Legislation was drafted in 2002, has not been amended since that time. So as you can see, the vagueness in this law, there is almost no legal standard or guideline or clearly stated expectation as to what a school board should do when evaluating whether or not to close or consolidate. Now, if you call the state board or the Department of Education and you ask them for technical guidance on what should be evaluated, you will be told that the state board does not have any jurisdiction or authority to weigh in on the local issues. Now, before I go any further, please let me be clear. We absolutely and unequivocally support and want these decisions to be made at the local level, which is why the legislation was drafted so that it's just an administrative review that provides advisory recommendations and not a transfer of responsibility. The local boards will still obtain final decision-making authority, and as some of the other conversations have indicated, we are fully and 100% supportive of an amendment that would strike the text about the district court judicial review. We're not here because we want to go to court. We are here because we want local school boards to follow a structured process that is commensurate with the level of analysis and structured thinking that any reasonable person on this committee would expect to see when dealing with a decision of this magnitude. I have more to say. May I have a few more minutes? Okay. Can you ask? Okay.
Well, we want you to have an opportunity to speak. You're reading from your testimony, correct?
Not for this next section. My next session addresses the concerns about an individual citizen initiating the petition review, and I believe it's extraordinarily important. I'm happy to talk to you about it offline, but it's key.
Okay, let's hear the next two testimonies. Let's ask questions, and then we'll get back to you if we have time, okay?
Love that, love that. Okay.
Well, we appreciate that you are here today.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to call on Danny Zach. He's this Kansas State Board of Education, District 1 member. Thank you for being with us today.
I'm not here as a Kansas State Board representative. I'm here as a private citizen and Rock Chalk Jayhawk, by the way. We need to get that out of the way real quick.
Okay.
I'm a life, this is way out of my comfort zone, just
March
so you know,
Madness.
as you can probably tell. I'm a lifelong resident of Kansas. Been here 73 years. I was a local school board member for 16 years. And I know how hard it is when you're grappling with school closures, having been through that. It's a hard issue, and it's a difficult, might be the most difficult decision that board members make. And although school board members are well-positioned to represent the values, needs, and priorities of their local communities, it's reasonable and rational for them to have additional support and guidance when dealing with financial and regulatory issues to school closures and excuse me. When dealing with the current statutes do not provide sufficient checks and balances between local school board members and citizens in consolidated school districts. And the provisions provided in Senate Bill 304 provide a simple and straightforward and reasonable solution that protects both the local school boards and the communities they represent. And the local boards still have the authority to make the final decision. The proposed legislation will help minimize future conflicts and will help to ensure that citizens and local board members have the support and checks and balances that are needed to manage school closure and questions in a neutral and respectful manner without any court action whatsoever. So the solutions outlined in Senate Bill 304 represent what's good for Kansas kids and Rock Chalk Jayhawk.
Thank you so much for that. Committee, we do have opponent written-only testimony from Representative Randy Garber, District 62. He is a member of our House of Representatives. We do have oral neutral testimony, and so at this time, I'd like to call Stan Keim, graduate of Sabetha High School. He's a parent and a grandparent of students in USD 113. And Stan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for allowing me to testify. The proposed legislation in Senate Bill 304 amends two different statutes, 72635, 72431. 72635 allows for residents of any district to submit a petition to force a vote in a district for disorganization of the entire district. And it is my understanding that since the 60s, that no petition has ever been submitted. Under current statute, if voters elect to disorganize, all territory must be assigned to an existing district. There's no means by which a new district can be created. Senate Bill 304 would change that. I live in USD 113, Sabetha. 113 has 3 campuses, Sabetha, Axtell, Wetmore. They're wonderful schools. All preschool through 12 grades are offered. We're unique, even though we're maybe a few miles from each other, school building to school building, we are a result of past consolidation. In February, just last month, after many months of public meetings and hearings, the USD 113 board, of which I'm a member, voted to close the Wetmore campus, a campus that has 125 students. Those opposed to that closing are now circulating a petition to disorganize 113. And I believe it's their hope that by disorganizing the entire district, a district of 1,070 students, that the state of Kansas would allow the organization of their own standalone district. So I have some concerns. All around the state, under 304, small schools would seek to disorganize their district in hopes of breaking free and becoming their own district. Kansas has traditionally promoted consolidating smaller districts into one and has provided financial incentives to do so. The cost to educate students in smaller school buildings is greater than in bigger school buildings. I know that's true in USD 113. And education, it's my understanding that education is already over 60% of the state general fund, and with smaller school districts being created, that number will go up. KSA 72635 is presently void as to what happens if this district is disorganized. Section 1 of Senate Bill 304 does provide some clarity as to the assets. But what does Section 2 do besides delay? The appeals process could take months, if not years. It could be impossible for a district to afford legal fees as well as trying to maintain and operate a school. And most importantly, the emotional toll to staff, community, students while the future of a school building is in limbo could be devastating. The proposed legislation transfers power from the duly elected representatives of the school board to district and appellate court judges. These judges with no ties to the school district, with scant knowledge of what was said in hearings and meetings, could reverse decisions made by school board officials. And I also believe that SB 304 raises some constitutional questions. Article 6 of the Constitution gives the state board general supervision, while it gives the local elected board the power to operate those school districts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So committee, that is our testimony, both proponent and neutral. At this time, we will open it up for questions. So we'll start with Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start off by thanking the individuals from Wilson and Wetmore communities. For coming all the way to Topeka to share your stories. I think they're very powerful. I think they're very heartbreaking. As we know, the schools in our communities are the foundation of our communities, are the pride of our community. And so every time we have a conversation about consolidation or closure, because we all see the writing on the wall, the trends in the state in terms of population migration to the bigger cities, that these conversations are going to take place more often. But I think we got to find a process and a place to do it where everyone's being heard and not being outnumbered by larger to smaller communities. Pitting communities together is not healthy and it's not good. We have it even in Sedgwick County, the second largest county in the state. In my community, we're having this fight with among communities. When one school was just closed in the last few years and they want to join another school district and they're being told no because the larger populations have more seats on the board of the community next door, and I won't be giving community names, it's just not worth it right now in this conversation. But the point is, I hear you, and I feel for you, and I know that the process of the petition, in my opinion, doesn't seem fair because we all know where the voters are. The bigger communities are going to always outweigh the smaller communities. So I am curious, actually, if Ms. No, sorry if I say your name wrong, if you'd be willing to kind of elaborate a little bit, but you said you had more to say on the petition, and if it's appropriate, Madam Chair, I'd like to hear more what your perspective is. But I do believe Senate Bill 304 is a good step, and the conversation ensuring that all communities are treated at least fairly and heard, because we know the importance of our schools and our communities. Thank you.
Some of the things that I
give us an overview.
Yeah, I won't read my speech. Some of the things I wanted to say about actually effectuating this type of a law where we can request an administrative review. I know one of the key questions is okay, so we're just going to let any citizen do this. So some single mom has 3 kids. She doesn't have a car to get to school. She's got a really heartbreaking story about why closing the school is bad. But we don't want every single person who has a really hard story about why closing the school is bad to be able to petition the state. So to illustrate this point, I want to draw your attention to 72-532, and in that statute, it provides a way to facilitate a transfer of land from one school district to another school district if there's disagreement between the 2 communities, okay? And when I spoke to the Kansas Department of Education rep about this, he refers to the legislation as petitioning the state for review. I said, oh, that's interesting. Tell me how that works, because I'm trying to petition the state for review for local board decisions. So I asked him, how does a petition for review get filed? How does the board take in all the relevant information related to the discussion? What data do they evaluate? What sort of details do they look at? And obviously, none of this information is included in the legislation. Okay, so yesterday, big breaking news. I will email this to you. Yesterday at 3:06 p.m., the general counsel from the Kansas Department of Education sent me a 16-page packet of information that outlines the process that they use in order to effectuate this statute. And it includes in it eight forms that an individual would have to fill out in order to initiate the review process. Those forms include things that are not easy to get. There's a 27-question survey. You have to do a survey of all of the landowners in the district area. You have to compare the outcomes before the transfer and after the transfer. There's a long list of reasonable data and inputs that an individual would have to provide in order to make a decision of that magnitude. Right? And I've said, oof, that is something that we're really missing in regards to school closure discussions. And I asked him, why don't we have this for managing school closure discussions? We need this. We need this, don't we? And what he said to me is, we don't have the authority or the jurisdiction to do that. The only reason we have this wonderful 16-page document is because the statute requires us to have it, because the statute has engaged us in the conversation, and therefore we have to meet our responsibilities. And so when we look at all of these local school closure decisions that are going to come in the next 3 and 5 years, this, I believe, is the right mechanism to do it, because the people who have the technical expertise and the experience and the years and years and years of dealing with the data, they can define what a local school board should put together to present to the community. And I'm telling you, especially in the instance of Wetmore, if someone can sit down with me and show me the data that makes sense, I will walk away from the decision. I will walk away. I'm not going to die on a hill for nothing, all right? But so far, none of those information and facts are being presented, and we just need a mechanism to have a conversation in a different way.
Other questions? I would like to hear a little bit more. Mr. Kratke, you had shared the one ADA compliant school as the one proposed for closure. tell us a little bit more about the 60-year-old non-ADA compliant building that's going to stay open.
The 60-year-old non-ADA compliant building was built in 1964. It was not part of our district. 328 was our district up until 2010, when they were having financial issues and they asked to come over, and our good heart, we let them come over. And now they've chose to close an ADA compliant building that was built in 98. And I don't know if you have the papers, but I had documents of all the information, pictures. It's a one building facility with K through 6, 7 through 12, 2 gymnasiums, football fields, all on one location. And so it's been a lopsided story. I might add something to partially his question. We did look at a transfer. We looked at 2 schools. Small schools get additional funding by low school enrollment. And they're in Tier 1, and as I understand, Tier 1's going to go down a little bit. But we looked at 2 schools that were our similar size, and it wasn't going to work. Because when we come over there, their tier funding goes down because their level goes up. And so one instance was they were getting $600,000. If we came over, the funding would drop to $580,000. They would get $289,000, $290,000, we'd get $290,000. They were dropping $310,000. So there's a problem there where 2 small schools can come together. Yes, I understand they need more funding, but there's no incentive for a small school to converge. And we were looking at a one-on-one school basis where then the board would be equal. I hope that answers your question.
You did answer my question, and I am going to ask, I know Dr. Swander's here from the Department of Education. I also have representatives from KASB and USA. Could you please get us a list with how many school buildings we have in our state that are non-ADA compliant? That to me seems like it is a federal violation, and it's inappropriate for any of our kids in Kansas to be in a non-compliant building. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that question also. My question goes back to when USD 112 was formed, I believe back in 2010, 2011, 2010, thank you. When that district was formed, was there a consolidation agreement between all of those schools? And what was that agreement? And how has that changed or evolved over time? Because I know legislation has changed, school finance has changed, a number of things have transpired between that consolidation and today.
The original consolidation gathering of the 2 boards to get together started in January of 2010. It completed in July of 2010 for the new school district. And I looked through all those minutes. There were a lot of discussion. One of them was that the other school would always remain open. And then I saw in the minutes later, it came to agreement that they would both try to keep open as long as they're viable. As far as them following any agreement they had back then, I think that's gone.
You may.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to shed light a little more on this district, so currently there is a middle school, high school open in Wilson. There's also an elementary school open in Wilson. There is a middle school in Claflin and high school?
No, Claflin has the 7 through 12. Holyrood has the K through 6.
Okay, Holyrood then has the K through 6, and Claflin has the 7 through 12. Right. So just to shed a little more light on that for everyone listening and watching this that may not be familiar with that. So each of those communities, despite the other smaller ones like Odin, Bushton does not have a school open, correct?
They closed it in 2019. It was also ADA compliant. It was built in 98.
Right, so there are a number of other small communities that are part of this school district that do not have a school building open. So I think, and I'm speculating here because I did not hear the the board meeting. I know it happened when we were here for the first day this session. So, but it's my speculation that the board is trying to maintain an open school in each of these three largest communities in that district, but also the Wilson actually has, I believe, the larger population out of these communities, which is the odd part of it, that Wilson actually has the population center. I believe they have like around 850, Claflin around 550, 600 maybe. Holyrood, I'm not even sure,
think
maybe
about 350.
350, 250, 350.
Yeah, right in there.
Yeah, so just to give everybody kind of a little bit more information on this subject, my question is also, what is the current process for dissolving a consolidation and returning back to their district prior to that consolidation? Because it's not necessarily like they're creating a whole new school district, but that they're wanting to undo something, like they have buyer's remorse, that it didn't work the way that they thought it would. And I'm really trying to appease all parties in this situation. I'm not as familiar with the Wetmore case, so, but if that helps with the Wilson school closure.
I think it would be helpful if we find out from the Department of Education, if they can report back to us what might be that process to kind of unring the bell. I do have a question for Katie Wisman. So it's non-binding once it goes to the State Board of Education. So since it's non-binding, what would be the benefit of that process or that step in the process?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So immediately, we feel like in the existing situations, it opens the door to that due process. So it gives them the opportunity to ask for a review and ensure that those decisions were made on a standard of reasonableness. I don't think that that's a standard that anyone of us would oppose. I think in the future, I like to think of this from the analogy of a traffic cop, right? So it has a deterrent effect. If I'm going through Silver Lake, I'm not going to be speeding through Silver Lake because I know there's a traffic cop sitting there. And just by virtue of their mere presence, it's a deterrent and it encourages me to follow the law when it comes to my speed. I think into the future, the fact that we have this administrative review process to access, and the fact that local boards know that that will be evaluated on a standard of reasonableness encourages them to slow down, be more methodical, more inclusive of all of the information, and most importantly, more transparent to the communities they serve in the process. And I think that that deterrent effect eventually prevents the exercise of the admin review. And ultimately, our hope would be that it prevents the exercise of the disorganization petition that's existed since 1960. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Senator Petty? Senator Teacher?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I do have a question for a conferee, but Tamara, there was brought up about consolidation and funding that incentives that are involved with consolidation. Could you remind us how that works?
Senator, this bill in front of you doesn't deal with consolidation, so I didn't review any of those statutes and would need time to look at that for you.
All right, because there is a funding mechanism that goes along with the consolidation that occurs, and I know that was referenced by, I think, Mr. Kraske, I think referenced that. So I think that's a piece of information that would be helpful.
And I think it would be fine if we get that, if we could get that, Craig, if it's easier for you to provide us that from the Department of Education, or if we get that from statute, from a revisor, either one, and if that is just simply submitted to us, and we'll get it presented to the committee on Monday. Follow up, Senator Petty.
Yes, and I think that this question I think it would go to Mike. Thank you for your testimony, and I really would say you've done a lot of research and been involved with this, and appreciate for all the information. But I'm trying to understand, so as you've been looking into this, did you make reference to the fact that the possibility of looking at a building going with another district?
We were pursuing a transfer with 2 different districts we tried. And our situation is catch-22. When we looked at a school our size to try to transfer with them, it raised their tier level, which brought less spending, less funding. But the other side of it is our population is larger, and so it tilts the board one way. And so they don't want to give that up to the other schools, and I understand. So we're caught in the middle with a catch-22. And there is no incentive for a small school to look at consolidation because it cuts their funding.
I mean, to look for a different consolidation, because you're already
Well, we were looking at actually a transfer into another district. We'd be part of their district. It's not consolidation, but it's a transfer. And it's not going to work for us because and I do think 2 schools in a district are balanced. But when you get more than that, we have 5 communities that have representatives, and our area covers 11 communities originally that came into, now it's down to 3 schools. And I was there, I went to a country school for 8 years, and I was in consolidation of 1966, 67. I was a freshman, so I've been around for a while.
And just to follow up on that, so when, you wouldn't remember necessarily as a freshman, but the determination of the representation on the school board, that came about with consolidation?
I presume, as I understand, although I do know one school, there's 2 schools in the districts, one is much larger than the other. They each have 3 members on the board, which keeps it balanced, and then they have at-large to change things. I think that's important, so that also one of the things we put out was that if you're going to close a school, the representatives from your school in that district are the only ones that can vote to close. And then you have your at-large, if it was 3 and 3. So the other thing too is our district is unusual in the state. It's long and narrow. And we have, to the other school that's staying open 7 through 12, we got a 30-mile drive, and it goes across some secondary roads. So it's an issue going either way.
Thank you.
I have Senator Dietrich, and I also have Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is for Katie, probably. Thank you, Katie. So in looking at this bill and the kinds of things that you're trying to accomplish, is the most important thing to have some sort of a state board advisory recommendation? I think that's what I'm hearing, but am I correct in that? That is the most important thing.
Yeah, yes, we would agree. That is the most important thing, to have the access to add, for that administrative review and the board's, recommendation and review of that. The other language we put in, because the only other option that currently exists, the nuclear option, it lacks clarity in terms of if that's exercised, what happens next. So that's why that's in there. But yes, our priority would be seeking review.
May I ask a follow-up?
Very quickly.
Yes, has the state board weighed in on this? Are they willing to do that? Anybody know?
I am not the right person to answer that question. I'll get you an answer and we can provide it back to the committee.
Thank you.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is probably a request from the Department of Education, just to have a little bit more knowledge, but what is the details if you were trying to transfer to a school district? And then if you were going to start a new school district, what are those regulations? And then as Katie was talking about that petition to disorganize, if we could get information on what all that entailed, just so we had some more background, greatly appreciate that.
Okay, committee, we are out of time with regard to this hearing, so I'm now going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 304. We do have one quick piece of business that I would like us to accomplish, and that is the hearing we had on House Bill 2092 with regard to Washburn University. So I know we talked about a balloon amendment, but do I just have a motion on that? I have a motion from Senator Dietrich. I have a second from Senator Sykes. Yes, Senator Gossage.
Quick question. This is the one about redistricting the board. Is that right?
It is to make the correction because of the redistricting
Okay.
of the Senate districts. Is there any other question or conversation? So all those in favor in passing out House Bill 2092 favorably, all those say aye. Aye. Opposed? It passes out unanimously. Thank you. Committee, we are adjourned.